The invitation arrived like a slap across the face, gold-embossed, heavy with the scent of privilege, but addressed to family and esteemed guests, with Rosalie's name conspicuously absent. She stared at the elegant cardstock in her cramped Barcelona apartment, the words blurring as her coffee grew cold on the scarred wooden table. "Mom, I can't have you there," Aurelia's voice had cracked over the phone the week before, laced with the kind of apology that felt more like a verdict. "It's not personal. It's just the family. The expectations. You understand, right?" Rosalie crumpled the invitation in her fist, the paper slicing into her palm like a paper cut from hell. At 48, she'd long ago learned to swallow the shards of rejection, but this one lodged deep, right in the heart she'd pieced back together after Elena's death 5 years prior. Elena, her wife of 15 years, the woman who turned their quiet life into a tapestry of stolen kisses under Andalusian stars and whispered promises in the shadow of the Sagrada Familia. They'd fled the suffocating grip of Rosalie's Texas family for Spain 2 decades ago, chasing a freedom that tasted like sangria and sea salt. But freedom, Rosalie knew, was a fragile thing, especially when it came to blood. She'd raised Aurelia here, in the labyrinthine streets of the Gothic Quarter, blending American grit with Catalan fire. Aurelia, her only daughter from a fleeting marriage to a man who'd vanished like smoke after the divorce, had grown into a woman of sharp edges and softer dreams. At 28, she was the spitting image of Elena, those hazel eyes that could storm or soothe, the cascade of chestnut waves that caught the Mediterranean light like a halo. But where Elena had embraced love without apology, Aurelia had bent toward the wind of wealth, lured back to the States by her fiancé, a Wall Street golden boy named Preston whose family owned half the vineyards in Rioja and whispered deals in Madrid boardrooms. Rosalie paced the terracotta-tiled floor, her bare feet slapping against the cool stone. The apartment was a shrine to their life, faded photos of Aurelia's childhood splashed in the fountain at Park Güell, Elena's old guitar propped in the corner, strings still humming with ghosts. She'd scrimped as a translator for American expats, piecing together a living from English manuals on olive oil exports and divorce decrees for homesick divorcees. It wasn't the life Aurelia dreamed of now, the one with crystal chandeliers and trust funds, but it was honest. Real. And Rosalie had poured every ounce of that realness into her daughter, teaching her to love fiercely, without chains. The phone buzzed again, Aurelia's name lighting up the screen like a flare. Rosalie let it ring, her breath catching as voicemail ticked over. "Mom, please don't hate me. Preston's parents. They're old money, you know. They asked about you, and I said you're traveling. It's easier this way. Easier." The word echoed, a hollow drumbeat. Rosalie sank onto the worn sofa, pulling a photo album from the shelf. Flipping through yellowed pages, she traced the arc of their family, baby Aurelia in Elena's arms at a seaside picnic, the three of them hiking the Camino de Santiago, laughter frozen in sepia. Elena's smile, always a little defiant, as if daring the world to look away. By dawn, the decision crystallized. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't fade into the footnotes of her daughter's happily ever after. Rosalie booked a flight to Seville, where the wedding sprawled across a converted hacienda owned by Preston's aunt, a sprawling estate with Moorish arches and infinity pools overlooking orange groves. She'd go uninvited, a shadow in the finery, because love didn't RSVP. It crashed the gate. The flight from Barcelona was a blur of recycled air and regret. Rosalie stared out the window at the patchwork of Iberian earth, her mind replaying the call that had gutted her. "It's not you, Mom. It's everything. The photos, the speeches. What if they ask?" Aurelia's voice had trembled, laced with the fear Rosalie recognized all too well, the fear of being the outlier in a room full of polished normals. Preston's family, the Harringtons, traced their lineage to Mayflower pilgrims who traded beaver pelts for Manhattan real estate. They summered in Biarritz, wintered in Aspen, and viewed Spain as a quaint backdrop for their philanthropy galas. To them, Rosalie was the black sheep who'd bolted for Bohemia, dragging their granddaughter into a life of paella and pride parades. Touching down in Seville's sweltering heat, Rosalie rented a battered Fiat and drove the winding roads to the hacienda, the radio crooning old Fleetwood Mac tunes that Elena used to belt out off-key. Her heart hammered as she crested the hill, the estate unfolding like a mirage, white stucco walls draped in bougainvillea, guests in pastel linens milling like swans on a manicured lawn. Valets in crisp uniforms waved her through the gate, her simple linen dress and sensible flats blending into the periphery of caterers and florists. She slipped into the ceremony like a thief, claiming a back pew beneath a canopy of jasmine. The air hummed with strings and the murmur of accents, Boston Brahmins mingling with Madrid elites. Aurelia appeared at the aisle's end, radiant in ivory lace that hugged her curves like a lover's whisper. Preston waited at the altar, tall and tawny, his smile all teeth and triumph. But as vows exchanged and rings slid into place, Rosalie's gaze locked on her daughter's face, not joy, but a flicker of fracture, like porcelain on the verge of shatter. The reception unfurled in a courtyard lit by lanterns, tables groaning under platters of jamon iberico and cava fountains bubbling like champagne waterfalls. Rosalie hovered at the edges, nursing a glass of Rioja, her presence a secret she guarded like contraband. She watched Aurelia whirl through dances, Preston's hand possessive on her waist, his mother, a silver-haired sentinel in pearls, whispering approvals. It was a world Rosalie had rejected, one of ledgers and legacies, where love was a merger, not a spark. Then, the toast. Preston's father, a ruddy-faced titan named Harlan, raised his glass from the head table. To Aurelia and Preston, may your union be as enduring as the Harrington name, blending the best of old worlds and new fortunes. Laughter rippled, but Rosalie's stomach twisted. She edged closer, hidden by a pillar, when Aurelia's eyes found hers across the crowd. Time stuttered. Aurelia's face drained of color, her flute trembling in her grip. "Mom." The word escaped like a gasp, slicing through the chatter. Heads turned. Whispers slithered like smoke. Harlan's brow furrowed, his gaze sharpening on Rosalie as if she'd gatecrashed with a pitchfork. Preston's arm stiffened around Aurelia, his smile congealing into something brittle. "What is she doing here?" Mrs. Harrington hissed, loud enough for the nearest tables to lean in. Aurelia wrenched free, storming toward Rosalie, her heels clicking like accusations. "I told you not to come." "God, Mom, why can't you just..." "Just what?" Rosalie kept her voice low, steady as the Guadalquivir. "Disappear. Pretend I don't exist so your perfect day stays photogenic." Up close, Aurelia's makeup couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes, the toll of compromises unspoken. "You're ruining this," Aurelia whispered, tears carving tracks through her blush. "They know about you and Elena. About everything. And now it's all they'll talk about." Rosalie reached for her daughter's hand, but Aurelia recoiled as if burned. "I raised you better than this, me lose. Love isn't a liability to bury." The words hung, heavy as the humid air, until Harlan's voice boomed from the dais. "Security. We have an uninvited guest." Two burly men in suits materialized, flanking Rosalie like bookends of judgment. As they escorted her toward the gate, the courtyard's glamour fractured into stares and murmurs. Rosalie held her head high, chin lifted against the sting, but inside, the old wounds tore open, echoes of her own wedding day in Austin, when her father had disowned her for Elena's hand in hers. She'd lost a family then, now, she was losing the one she'd built. Outside the gates, under a canopy of ancient oaks, Rosalie leaned against the Fiat, sobs racking her frame. The engine roared to life, but she idled there, watching taillights flicker like distant stars. Home was Barcelona, but the road felt endless, a ribbon of what-ifs unspooling into the night. The drive back to Seville's airport was a haze of taillights and tears, the radio silence to spare her the irony of love songs. Rosalie gripped the wheel until her knuckles blanched, replaying the courtyard's betrayal in loops that clawed at her chest. Aurelia's face, that beautiful, broken mask, haunted her more than the Harringtons' disdain. How had they drifted so far? From bedtime stories in Catalan to this chasm, bridged only by occasional Venmo transfers and birthday cards that arrived late. She checked into a nondescript hotel near the Alcazar, the room smelling of starch and solitude. Collapsing onto the bed, Rosalie pulled out her phone, scrolling through old texts from Elena. "Our girls got your fire, Rosie. Don't let the world dim it." Elena, gone too soon to pancreatic cancer, her laugh silenced in a Valencia hospital room while Aurelia, then 23, had stood frozen at the foot of the bed, whispering, "Don't leave us." In the aftermath, Aurelia had clung to Rosalie like a lifeline, the two of them navigating grief in tandem, beach walks at Costa Brava, therapy sessions where tears mingled like rain. But then Preston entered, stage right, with his Harvard pedigree and promises of stability. "He's solid, Mom," Aurelia had gushed over FaceTime. "Not like. Well, you know." Rosalie knew. She'd been the cautionary tale, the woman who'd chosen passion over pension plans, love over lineage. Her own family back in Texas had cut her off decades ago, her fathers will divvying shares to brothers who'd towed the line. "Blood's thicker than whatever this is," he'd growled at the reading, tossing the envelope like trash. Rosalie had vowed never to wield inheritance as a weapon, but life had other plans. A knock shattered the midnight quiet. Room service. She hadn't ordered. Cracking the door, she found a liveried envelope, no sender noted. Inside, a single sheet of cream vellum, scripted in an antique hand. "Rosalie Whittaker Hernandez, you are summoned to the reading of Harlan J. Harrington's last will and testament. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Harrington Estate Library. Your presence is non-negotiable." Her pulse thundered. Harlan. The man who'd just had her ejected like refuse. It reeked of trap, but curiosity, and a masochistic streak, propelled her. Dawn painted the city in ochre, and Rosalie drove back to the hacienda under a sky bruised with clouds. The gates swung open without protest this time, a butler escorting her through sun-dappled halls to a library redolent of leather and aged scotch. Mahogany shelves groaned under tomes of forgotten fortunes, a crystal decanter glinting on a sideboard. Seated around a Chippendale table were the Harrington inner circle, Mrs. Harrington, her lips pursed like a coin slot, Preston, Ty Askew from the night's revelry, Aurelia, pale in a silk robe, eyes red-rimmed, and a cluster of lawyers in pinstripes, briefcases like sentinels. "You're here," Aurelia breathed, half relief, half reproach. Harlan's absence loomed, his high-backed chair empty as a throne abdicated. The lead attorney, a hawkish man named Ellis, cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington passed in his sleep last night. Heart attack, we're told." He insisted this reading occur immediately, with all parties present. Gasps rippled, Mrs. Harrington dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed hanky, Preston muttering condolences that rang hollow. Rosalie sat rigid, the news landing like a stone in still water. The man who'd scorned her was gone, his empire teetering. Ellis unfolded the will, his voice a monotone dirge. Assets tallied in millions, vineyards in La Rioja, lofts in Soho, offshore accounts that could fund a small nation. Bequests flowed, scholarships for Preston's cousins, trusts for nieces. Then, the pivot. "To my granddaughter Aurelia Harrington Whittaker, I leave the Seville estate and 20% of Harrington Vineyards, contingent upon her dissolution of her recent marriage and reconciliation with her mother, Rosalie Hernandez. Blood honors blood, love mends what prejudice rends." The room detonated. Mrs. Harrington's hanky flew like a white flag of fury. "Harlan, you old fool. What is this drivel?" Preston surged to his feet, face mottled. "This is blackmail. Aurelia, tell them it's a joke." But Aurelia stared at the page, transfixed, as if the words rewrote her skin. "Grandpa knew. About Mom and Elena." Her voice was a thread, unraveling. Ellis nodded gravely. "Mr. Harrington confided in me years ago. He'd followed your mother's life from afar, clippings from Barcelona papers, photos from your visits. He regretted his silence, the family's cold shoulder. This was his amends." Rosalie's world tilted. Harlan, the patriarch of propriety, had watched from the shadows. Watched her build a life from ashes, raise Aurelia amid the ruins of rejection. A memory surfaced, a Christmas card, unsigned, postmarked from Madrid, enclosing a check she'd cash without question. His hand, invisible but steadying. Aurelia turned to her, eyes searching. "Mom." "He left it to me, but only if," her words choked, the robe slipping from one shoulder like a shed skin. "If you choose us over this," Rosalie finished softly, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and unspoken grief. "Not us against them, Mija. Just us." Mrs. Harrington's tirade crescendoed, "You'll bankrupt us all." But Preston's grip on Aurelia's arm tightened, possessive, revealing the fracture beneath his polish. "Babe, think about it. The life we planned. This is just his dementia talking." Aurelia wrenched free, the motion seismic. "Our life. Or the one you scripted." She faced Rosalie fully, the library fading to a blur. "I pushed you away because I was scared. Scared of losing this, the money, the status. But losing you. That's the real poverty." Tears crested, spilling freely now. Rosalie rose, closing the distance in 3 strides, enveloping her daughter in an embrace that smelled of salt and second chances. "You never lost me, Aurelia. I was always here, waiting for you to remember." The lawyers shuffled papers, Mrs. Harrington stormed out with a parting shot of disinheritance threats, and Preston lingered, his world crumbling like dry earth. But in that moment, mother and daughter stood anchored, the will not a chain but a key, unlocking doors long bolted against the light. As the sun climbed higher, piercing the leaded windows in shafts of gold, Rosalie felt Elena's presence, a warm exhalation on her neck. The road ahead forked, toward Barcelona's embrace or the uncharted wilds of forgiveness, but for the first time in years, it felt navigable. Together. The aftermath of the will reading spilled into the hacienda's sunlit salon, where tempers flared like fiesta fireworks and alliances shattered like cheap crystal. Mrs. Harrington, Evelyn to her bridge club but a viper in velvet now, paced the Persian rug, her heels sinking into the weave like accusations. Harlan was senile, addled by that last Rioja vintage. To tie our legacy to this scandal. She gestured wildly at Rosalie, who sat composed on a velvet settee, Aurelia's hand clasped in hers like a talisman. Preston hovered by the French doors, phone glued to his ear, murmuring to unseen brokers about contingency plans. His eyes darted between Aurelia and the exit, calculating losses like a ledger in the red. "We can contest this, babe. Lawyers, appeals, hell, we elope to Vegas and flip Harlan the bird post-mortem." Aurelia's laugh was brittle, a shard of glass in the tension. "Elope? That's your fix. Run from the mess you helped make." She rose, smoothing her robe with hands that still trembled, her engagement ring glinting mockingly in the light. "You knew, Preston. About the whispers, the looks when I mentioned Mom. And you smiled, said it was old-fashioned prejudice. But you fed it, didn't you? Told your folks she'd calmed down after Elena." He flushed, the golden boy tarnished. "I was protecting you. This life, our life, it's not some artist's garret in Spain. It's security, future-proofing. You think I want my kids raised on translations in tapas?" The word "kids" landed like a gut punch, and Aurelia's face crumpled. Rosalie squeezed her hand tighter, a silent vow, "You're enough. Always were. But the dam broke anyway. Future-proofing. That's code for closets, Preston. Hiding who I am because it dents your portfolio." She slipped the ring from her finger, the diamond winking farewell as it clattered onto the side table. "I can't marry a man who sees my mother as a footnote." Preston's jaw slackened, then hardened. "You're throwing it all away for her. For some outdated grudge." He jabbed a finger at Rosalie. She chose this, chose Elena over family, over everything normal. "Normal," Rosalie echoed, her voice a quiet thunder. "You mean the kind that disowns daughters for loving women? The kind that sends checks instead of Christmas cards?" She met his gaze, unflinching, the weight of 48 years etching lines of quiet defiance around her eyes. I chose love, son. Messy, unbreakable love. The kind that outlasts estates and egos. Evelyn halted her circuit, eyes narrowing to slits. And what would you know of legacies, Miss Hernandez? You fled to this godforsaken country, raising our Aurelia on handouts and half-truths. Harlan pitied you, that's all this is. Pity. Aurelia's voice whipped through the room. Grandpa pitied the family that shut him out too. Did you know he wrote to me last year? Said he envied Mom's courage, wished he'd fought harder for his own sister, the one you all pretend was unwell because she ran off with her painter girlfriend in the 70s. The revelation hung, a bomb detonated in slow motion. Evelyn paled, clutching the mantle as if it might anchor her unraveling world. Rosalie hadn't known that part, the Harrington skeleton, a lesbian aunt exiled to Paris garrets, her portraits gathering dust in attics. Harlan's will wasn't whimsy, it was reckoning, a posthumous rebellion against the very bloodline he'd stewarded. By noon, the estate emptied like a stage after the final act. Preston packed his Maserati with curt nods and legal threats, Evelyn retreating to her Biarritz villa with a flurry of solicitors' cards. Aurelia and Rosalie lingered in the library, the will's pages spread like a map to uncharted terrain. What now? Aurelia asked, tracing the ink as if it held prophecies. Rosalie smiled, faint but genuine, the first in days. We go home. Or find a new one. Yours to choose. They chose Barcelona, the drive north a pilgrimage of detours, stops at roadside tabernas for patatas bravas and stories swapped over Estrella Galicia. Aurelia confessed the fractures, how Preston's charm had masked control, how the wedding's opulence had felt like chains disguised as lace. I thought wealth would fill the hole Elena left. But it just echoed. Rosalie nodded, the highway blurring past olive-dotted hills. Grief doesn't bill by the acre, Mija. It shrinks when you share it. They talked of Elena too, not as a ghost, but a guide, her recipes for tortilla española, the way she'd dance barefoot to Joan Baez's records, teaching Aurelia that vulnerability was the truest strength. Back in the Gothic Quarter apartment, life resumed with tentative stitches. Aurelia enrolled in a local design program, sketching textiles inspired by Moorish tiles, while Rosalie took on a new client, an American expat writing memoirs of her own hidden loves. Evenings unfolded on the balcony, overlooking La Rambla's bustle, glasses of vermouth clinking in toast to mended edges. Months later, a package arrived from Seville, the estate's keys, deeded solely to Aurelia. Evelyn's countersuit crumbled under Harlan's airtight clauses. But Aurelia sold it quietly, funneling proceeds into a foundation for LGBTQ+ artists in Spain, scholarships for dreamers who'd choose heart over heritage, just as her mother had. One crisp autumn evening, as leaves skittered like confetti in the placa rail, Aurelia linked arms with Rosalie at a small gathering, a commitment ceremony for two women from Rosalie's translation circle, vows exchanged under lantern glow. To love without ledger, Aurelia murmured, echoing Elena's old refrain. Rosalie pulled her close, the city's pulse thrumming around them. To family, reforged. In the crowd's cheers, she glimpsed Elena's smile in the shadows, a reminder that some betrayals bend but don't break, and redemption blooms not in fortunes, but in the quiet courage to return. As the night deepened, mother and daughter walked home arm in arm, the stars above Barcelona winking like old friends. The will had changed everything, yes, but it was their choice to let it heal that rewrote the stars.